for me? Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Daniel Cornwall. I'm the Internet and Technology Consultant with the Alaska State Library, the section of Library Development. And today we're going to cover some mostly basics about Excel formulas, maybe a few things that you haven't seen. Hopefully that's the case. As we get started, I wanted to do a quick little introduction and a few ground rules. The intro is the tips that we're going to cover. I've verified that they will work from Excel 2007 to 2013. And if you're still using Excel 2003, probably be good to find something else, even if it's something free like Google Spreadsheets. As I just mentioned, the session is being recorded for archiving. It'll hopefully be posted later today along with the session handout. And now for a couple of ground rules. I'm very open to having you ask questions when you have questions. Julie and I will both be looking at the chat window, and I'll try to answer them as they're being asked. Anything that can't be answered right at the time, we'll get back to you on. If you need to step away for any reason, feel free to. We're all busy, things come up. I won't feel bad about it. And then the last ground rule that I'd like to say is that once we get done with the webinar, really try to practice at least one thing that we go over here, because that'll really help cement the knowledge in your head. So the ground rules: ask questions, step away if you need to, and practice one thing. Do those sound like ground rules that you can agree to? And if they are, could you go ahead and just type yes into the chat box? Okay, excellent, and thank you. So here are the things that I believe that you will know after today, if you don't already know some of these. You'll know how to create Excel formulas. You'll know what we call the order of operations, so that if your formula goes wrong, you'll understand why. We'll talk about copying formulas so that you don't have to type in the same formula over and over. We will briefly cover some Excel functions. There are many, many different functions that you can use in your formula, and we're just going to look at a handful. And as a practical example, we're going to take a hypothetical example of a library that does tabulations of their daily attendance and use some simple Excel formulas to do some quick analysis on them. And I see something coming possibly from Stacy. Okay. Was that no to the ground rules, or just know that you were typing something? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So the basic idea of a formula is that it operates on a number or another cell in the Excel spreadsheet. It always has to start with an equal sign. And I give you a couple of examples here. If you want to, and it's not terribly interesting, but you can use Excel as a calculator. You can just type in numbers, and that's considered a formula. But you can also do formulas, and I think something far more interesting, by cells. Like this formula in B takes the contents of C1, adds it to the contents of D1, and then multiplies it by whatever's in E1. So in this case, the plus and asterisk multiplying signs are called operators. And if you're curious about how I got the formulas to display, because normally once you type in a formula and tab off to another cell, it replaces the formula with whatever the calculation is. And in the case of A1 right here, what it would do is that it would give me 12. But it turns out that if you press the Control key, the plus key, and the accent key, which is normally found above your tab key, you can force Excel to display every single formula in your spreadsheet. And so aside from it being helpful in creating Excel presentations, you'll find it helpful in troubleshooting formulas. So the order of operations, and a quick apology for this slide. This slide originally didn't say what I thought it did, so I had to do a quick screen clipping out of another document that I had. And looks like there might be something from Paul. Yes, that's right. The Control key and the plus key and the accent key. And so the order of operations within Excel is pretty much what most of us learned in school, but we always need reminders, or at least I do, is it'll first do anything in parentheses, anything between brackets. And then it'll do exponential calculations, like calculating the cube of 3. Then it'll do multiplication and division, whichever one of those comes first, and then addition and subtraction, whichever comes first. And this gets to be important because if you change the order of some of your items, it can change the the result that appears in your cell. Any questions about order of operations? If it's not really clear, we can go ahead and do a live demo later on. Okay, not seeing. Okay, maybe something from Stacy. And welcome, Kate. We are recording this webinar, so you can see the very beginning. Okay, Stacy. When we go into the live demo, we'll do some. We'll do a couple of things about operations. And let's see. Okay. So we have a live demo. So let me go ahead and change to our, well, before I do the screen share, what I want to be able to demonstrate for you is once you type in a formula, Excel has this really neat feature where you can copy the formula and it will actually copy to the appropriate cells. And I'll show what I mean by that in just a minute. So I'm going to do my screen share now. And I'm going to bring up Excel. And at this point, let's see. Okay. Sorry about that. I lost my chat box temporarily. There it is, and you might see a black spot. Okay, I'm going to open up a new spreadsheet, and what we're going to do is I'm going to type in some values. This is an example that I should have had prepared prior. Okay, 12, 24, 10. Just bear with me. I just want some things to act upon. I do have another example prepared well. So what I want to do, okay. Are you all seeing the Excel screen now? If you could just, okay, great. So in column A and column B, I've written some numbers. And now in column C, I'm going to write a formula to multiply A7 by B7. And so that's just going to be equals A7 times B7. And let's see, control. Okay, I did the control plus and caret symbol again in order to be able to make the formula go away. And let me shift back for one moment. So what I've got is A7 times B7. And you would think that if I copy the formula to the next, if I copy this to the next cell down, I would get A7 plus B7 again. But it turns out that Excel is actually smarter than that. So I'm going to highlight the A7, B7 again. And if you cursor around enough, and I'm not sure you can see it, but at some point your cursor is going to turn into a tiny little plus sign. It's a white plus sign right now on my screen, and then a tiny black plus sign. Once it turns into that black plus sign, you're going to hold down the left mouse key and then pull it down. And then when you let go, it's going to fill the formula with the new values. And then you notice instead of A7 times B7, the next cell is A8 times B8 and A9 times A9. And I'm just going to shift back to chat for a moment to see if there's questions. Okay, Stacy asked, how do you make the formulas go away? And I make them go away with the same thing I used to make them appear. I'm going to hold down the control plus and accent keys again. And it works if you're actually in Excel and not eliminate. Okay, and now the formulas have been disappeared and have been replaced by the results of the multiplication. And so this is really handy when you've got something with like 100 spreadsheets that you need to make calculations on. You just type in the formula once and then basically click and drag down the formula to the bottom of your spreadsheet, and then it's all automatically calculated. So we talked a little bit about the order of operations. So let's go back to, we'll do equals, and if we do 7 minus 3 parentheses, which will give us 4, and then multiply that by 3, we should get 12. Are we in agreement on that? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that. And indeed, we got 12. Now, if instead of putting the parentheses there, I took them away, so now what I'm going to have in the formula is 7 minus 3 times 3. So 7 minus 3 times 3 without any parentheses. So minus 3. Okay, let me look at that. So minus 3. Okay, well, the good news is that we have a different result. Now, Oh, and the reason why we have a different result is that in this case, multiplication was done ahead of addition and subtraction. And so it multiplied 3 times 3, gave us 9, subtracted that from 7, and thus we're left with -2. So if the formulas aren't generating the values that you'd expect in the first couple of cells, go back and look into it and see if maybe you need to add some parentheses or change the order of the elements. Any other questions about order of operations? Maybe something from Stacy? Parentheses are actually for anything. The object of parentheses are to make sure that that thing gets done first. So I could have just as easily done, and in theory I could have put the multiplication first, but the multiplication was going to happen anyway. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, usually you'll see the addition and subtraction in parentheses. Sometimes they come into play with exponents, but hopefully that's not going to be so much your area in the library. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share and go back to my slides. Other question I should have asked was it perfectly clear how we went about actually taking one formula and copying it down a column? We could also copy it down a row if people wanted to. It works both ways. Okay. And hello, Lucy. We're a little bit into our session, but this is being recorded and will be made available after the webinar, as well a handout with most of my major points. So we just finished about the section on copying formulas, and now moving on. I want to talk about functions and formulas, because aside from the basic operators that we've sort of talked about, the multiplication, the division, the addition, and subtraction, is these things called functions that often happen over an entire column or row of cells. And if you haven't used it already, one of the most useful is going to be your sum formula. And how it works, and how like many of the Excel functions work, is you have the name of the function, in this case sum, and then you have the first cell that you want to operate on and the last cell that you want to operate on. So if we wanted to do a sum of a column that only had 4 numbers in it, we might go into sum A1, then a colon, and then A4. And instead of just adding up A1 and A4, it'll add up A1, A2, A3, and A4. And one of the nice things about sum, as is the case with many of functions in Excel, is that it's relatively forgiving. If you had 3 numbers and the word cat, it wouldn't give you an error. It would just sum up the 3 numbers. One thing that it is important to make sure is that your entire column is in fact selected, because if there is a break in data, like a blank space or a word, when you start working with the functions, it won't select the whole column necessarily. And I'll give a demo of that when we do our little library operations demo, which actually should be the next slide. So I'm assuming that you have a worksheet, maybe a spreadsheet, where you do a count of people for the day that come into your library, and you have a spreadsheet that has the date and then the number of people who came in, and you've recorded that. Now, it's probably easy enough to add up how many people came to the library that month, but there's a few functions in Excel that may come in handy that could tell you what was the maximum number of people that came during the month, what was the lowest number that came in on any particular day, and what's your average daily attendance, because Excel has a really nice shortcut for that. So let me go back into screen sharing and then into my spreadsheet. Okay, so what we have here is a spreadsheet of values, and I'll make it a little larger, but the first column is date and the first column is visitors. And maybe that's a bit too much. Let's see. I'm going to make it 150%. Okay. So we have this range of numbers, the dates, and then I'm going to do my trick again of actually showing you what the formulas are, because right now you're seeing the monthly total of 1478, the weirdly formatted average number, which we can fix, and then the maximum number of visitors and the minimum number of visitors. So of the people who were here from the beginning, can someone tell me how I would go about showing all the formulas in my spreadsheet? Okay, Stacy, that's right. We're going to hit the control button, the plus side, and the accent mark. And could one of you who typed that in tell me where I can find the accent mark? That's correct, Stacy, above the tab key. And that's also correct, Kathleen. And I say it partly to reinforce the learning of people who will be viewing the recording. So let me go ahead and do that, and I need to pop back into Excel. So as you've probably guessed, to get the monthly total, I did sum, and then again, using the basic structure of the formulas, I did B2 to B32. And the reason why I didn't do B1 is because B1 had my had the word visitors in it. It's my header row. Had I put in B1, it wouldn't have changed anything because it wouldn't count the word visitors as having any numerical value. Now let's go through a quick example of, let's see, okay. Let's go through a quick example of how I'd actually get the sum down here. Let's pretend that it didn't exist. So I will go ahead and wipe it out. And so now I've got this blank spot. And on your version of Excel, you will probably see something called a ribbon. For whatever reason, this particular computer that I'm on has chosen to hide the ribbon when I'm not using it. So, and I don't want to waste your time figuring out how to make it stay, so we'll just assume that it only appears when we need it. And I'm going to go over to the Formulas tab. Oh, and I'm sorry, one thing that I want to do before then is I'm going to make a little break in 27. in row 27. So I'm going to go up and do insert. Actually, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to highlight the row. I'm going to do a right click, and then I'm going to choose insert that comes from the little pop-up menu. And that'll give me a blank space, and that'll help me demo something for you. And now I'm just checking the chat box to see if there's anything. Don't see it yet. Okay, so back to our monthly total spot. Back up to the Formulas tab. And then I'm going to click under Auto Sum. And I'm going to choose Sum. And this is where we're going to see the beauty and ignorance of Excel. So I'm going to click on Sum. And do people see what the problem is? I want to be able to sum up the full usage for the month, and it looks like I'm only getting a partial list. And it's basically because I have that break in 27. But we can actually fix this, and the way that we would is we would click back into the cell that has the function, and then we'd move it. Do you see that flashing area? There's a kind of a, actually it stopped flashing now, but it's a striped box. Okay, what we'll do, let me go back into Excel, is I'm going to move up to the top of that striped area. No, okay. Okay, that is not what I was expecting it to do. Okay, so rather than moving up to the top, I moved up to the corner, and now I'm pulling it up the column. And I'm just going to pull it up all the way to B2. And now if I scroll down, you'll see that we're back to some B2, B33. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the formulas again. So Control, plus, and caret. And you can see that I'm back to my 1478. And if we type in like the word cat, I don't get any errors. If I were to type in another number, like let's say 9,000, then it'll definitely update the total. So that's sum. Average is similar. It's just the word average. Let me drop this into the chat box. Just the word average in B2 and B33. The colon is important. If you put a comma, I think it'll just add the two together. And then you find average actually in the same area as you found that auto sum. I mean, as you found sum, you want to go to formulas, and we'll make the tab visible again. Auto sum, and then you can see you have average, max, and min, which are the two other formulas that I thought would be potentially helpful. As long as we're talking about the functions, you always have a set of the ones that you've recently used. And I seem to be having some slow computer issues. Oh. Okay. So recently used, you can see some of the ones that have been done. There's financial, and this can be helpful in loan payments if your library or parent organization is keeping track of like mortgage payments, or there's all sorts of things here. One thing that would be helpful, I think, is in the date and time, and I'm actually not seeing it here. And in Excel 2013, there's a function called days that'll actually give you days between, and then math and trig and just more other stuff. Okay. Oh. Okay, I'm going to do a couple of... Okay. So are people curious about how to get the 47.67741935 to a more reasonable number? Or does somebody already know that already? Because it's pretty handy. Okay, I think I'm seeing something from Paul. Okay. Basically, you want to highlight either the cell or column that you're interested in and do a right click, and then one of the options that you get is Format Cells. And I'm going to choose that. And that's going to give me a little box, and I'm going to click on number, because right now general is highlighted. But if I click on number, it allows me to control the number of decimal places. And I'm going to set it to just one decimal place. And when I click OK, we should have an average number of visitors of 47.7. Now, before I leave the screen share, is it clear to you how I got the maximum number of visitors on any one day was 100 and the minimum number of visitors was 4? Okay, thank you, Kathleen. And if really this is a case where you only had to say no. Okay, so moving on, I will go ahead and stop my screen share. And where? Okay. Sorry for the little bit of confusion on my part. Okay, going back to my slides. So just in case I need to do this example again, does the analyzing library attendant seem like a useful example? And if it's not, what sort of thing would you suggest as an example instead? And I really appreciate that people are writing on these. Yeah, I thought about circulation stats. I wonder how many catalogs, automated catalogs, actually give you a useful picture. Ah, okay, use it for your book fair. And that can be good for tracking prices and inventory. Okay, so that gives me a few good ideas. Let's go ahead and advance the slide. And I showed you these a little bit in Excel. I'd encourage you to look through them. I think a lot of you, or a lot of people listening to this recording, are probably going to be fine with the averages and the adding and subtracting. But there's more functions, and maybe some will be very helpful for your patrons. Is there any particular function that maybe you've heard about that you'd like to see demonstrated? Going once. Going twice. Okay. At this point, I'd like to take any sort of general questions about anything that I presented or Excel in general, and then I just have like a quick slide or two after that. And it looks like we have something from Stacy, and maybe from Liz. Okay, so Lucy, the version of Excel that is on this particular computer that I have is Excel 2010. Downstairs I have Excel 2013, and the tips that are in the recording and the handout should also work on Excel 2007. But what you've actually been seeing here is 2010. And okay, so it should look fairly similar. And Stacy, for your question, how would you copy and paste a formula into a Word document? I'm not sure that you would actually paste a formula per se into a Word document. You'd paste the values from it. I want to say that there's probably a way to link an Excel document to Word, but I'd honestly have to get back to you on that. And I'm just going to do a quick write down, so I'm going to mic off while I do that. Okay. Any other questions or comments? I've got that one for Stacy. Oh, okay. You were trying to put in an addition formula into a column of numbers so that it would add for me. In that case, I can tell you definitively you ought to do that. You ought to copy and paste that column of numbers into Excel. It ought to automatically do one number to a cell, sum it up there, and then copy it back into Word. That's what I would recommend doing. Anybody have anything else? Okay. Well, I wanted to make this offer that if you're working with Excel spreadsheets specifically with formulas and you find that there's errors, one thing that happens to some people is they type in equals, type in the formula, and instead of getting a number, they get $ value. And that's a sign that there's something wrong with the formula, but it's not always obvious what. And your first thing that you ought to try when you get a number sign value, it would be to use Control plus and the accent symbol to actually display the formula. And maybe you've mistyped a character or two. That's something that can do a value. Or maybe you've accidentally divided by 0 or something else like that. Or you're potentially trying to, well, I think if you try to multiply a number by a word, it'll just give you 0 because it'll assume the word is 0. But if you're having trouble and you can't quite figure it out, I'm very happy to look at your spreadsheet and see if I can figure out what the formula ought to be. And then, since it's hard to contact me without contact information, here it is, my email address and phone number. So I appreciate you taking some time this afternoon to learn a little bit more about Excel. And again, if there's something unfamiliar to you, and I'd suggest at the very least revealing and then hiding the formula with formulas with Control, with Control plus sign and the accent symbol, because that's a tip that I think will both come in handy and be hard to remember. but make yourself up some formulas, type in some random numbers and do calculations on them. So does anybody have any comments on anything? If not, I think we're done this afternoon. Okay, you're welcome, Kathleen. Thanks, Stacy. Thanks, Julie.